First thing they took was the sky. Jethro didn't notice it at first. He was 26 and loud and in love with speed. The kind of love that lives in your knuckles and your throat, that turns red lights into suggestions and Tuesday mornings into something worth surviving. He'd been running on 4 hours of sleep and black coffee for so long that reality had started to feel like a suggestion anyway. Soft at the edges, negotiable. So when the corner of his bunk flickered just slightly, like a bad signal on a screen he hadn't known he was watching, he blinked and looked away and told himself it was the coffee. It wasn't the coffee. The Vithara had been on Earth for 11 years. Now 11 years. Since the first ship settled into low orbit, like patient birds of prey, their hulls the color of old bone, and humanity had watched from rooftops and parking lots and hospital waiting rooms with the particular feeling of people who had always half expected this, and were therefore somehow more frightened than if it had come as a true surprise. They hadn't attacked. That was the first shock. They'd simply arrived and waited. And when every nuclear warhead in every silo on the planet had been discreetly and thoroughly vaporized without a word of warning or explanation, they'd made contact. The word they used in synthesized voices that sounded like 3 languages arguing was sanatorium. Took linguists 14 months to understand what they meant. The Vithara, it turned out, had been watching humanity for a very long time. Long enough to conclude that the human species was profoundly, structurally unwell, violent, self-destructive, running at speeds no healthy organism should sustain. Their proposal was compassionate, at least by their own lights. They would help, they would treat the illness at its source. They would install, in every human nervous system capable of accepting the procedure, a neural lattice they called the resting frame. A soft, intelligent override that would quiet the worst of human impulse. The rage, the recklessness, the maddening tendency to accelerate toward cliffs and call it living. Procedure was painless. The results were measurable. Crime rates dropped. Accident statistics collapsed. Humans became, in the Vithara's careful assessment, measurably more healthy. They became quieter, slower, content. 3 years for anyone to realize that the humans who underwent the procedure had also stopped inventing things. That they'd stopped writing music that hurt. That they'd stopped staying up too late, talking about ideas that didn't matter and couldn't wait. That the particular bright burning quality of human attention, that dangerous, exhausting, magnificent thing, had been dimmed to something the Vithara found appropriate. Jethro had been 11 when his parents accepted the procedure. He'd been too young to process then what he understood now, that the people who came back weren't wrong. Exactly. They were just less sharp, less loud. Less present in the particular way that his father had once been present, filling a room just by breathing in it. He had refused the procedure at 18, again at 21, again last year. The Vithara, to their credit, did not force it. Consent, they said, was fundamental to the treatment's efficacy. The resting frame functioned best in willing hosts. They were patient. They could wait. What nobody told Jethro, what he had no way of knowing, what the resistant cells were only beginning to piece together in the months before his bunk corner flickered, was that consent was not actually required. That the Vithara had been running a longer, quieter program alongside the voluntary one. That for the humans who refused, who kept running, who kept burning too bright, there was a secondary approach. They called it the dissolution protocol. And Jethro had been enrolled in it for 6 months. He noticed the second wrongness in the mess hall. He was eating alone, the way he usually did. The other soldiers, assigned to Station 12, mostly moved through their days in the particular careful way of the treated, unhurried and equable. And Jethro had long since given up trying to eat breakfast at conversation speed. He liked it fine. He ate fast, read faster, thought about 3 things at once, and called that a normal morning. The table across from him had 2 legs. He counted again. 2 legs. The table was standing on 2 legs, perfectly stable, and his brain was quietly insisting that was fine, that it had always been that way, and beneath that insistence was a cold, sick feeling of a deeper wrongness. the knowledge that his brain was lying to him. He set his fork down, he breathed. He counted the legs again and got 2, and then 4, and then 2 again, oscillating on a frequency he couldn't tune out. He went to see Warrant Officer Chung. Chung was the closest thing Station 12 had to a doctor who hadn't been treated. She'd refused the procedure on religious grounds, or that was the official paperwork. Jethro had always suspected the religion was something she'd invented specifically for the purpose. But he'd never asked and she'd never told. She was small and precise, and had the quality of being more alert than everyone around her, by a factor that showed up in her eyes before anywhere else. Psst. She listened to him describe the table and said nothing. She asked him to describe the bunk corner again. She made him take a seat, and she put a small metal instrument against his temple and read something on a screen, and then put the instrument down very carefully. The way people put things down when they don't want to show their hands. "How long have you been having it?" she asked. "The flickers?" 4, maybe 5 days. "How long have you been refusing the procedure?" 8 years. She looked at the screen again. "Jethro." Her voice was very level. "There's a Vethera lattice in your temporal cortex. It's not new. Based on the growth patterns, I'd estimate 6 months." He heard the words. He didn't understand them for a moment. Then he did. "They put it in me anyway. They put it in you anyway." He sat with that. The mess hall noise continued down the corridor. Trays and quiet voices. And the particular subdued hum of 1,200 treated humans going through their appropriately paced days. And he sat in the stillness of that noise and understood that his refusals had counted for nothing, that the table legs and the bunk corner and the soft creaking convincingness that 2 was the same as 4 had been designed. Progression, or a treatment plan. "What's the timeline?" he said. Chung hesitated, which was the answer. "Best estimate," he said. "The dissolution protocol works in stages. What I can read of the lattice activity, you've completed stage 1. Stage 2 is perceptual. Stage 3 is, the literature calls it acceptance. After acceptance she stopped. There's no coming back." "There's no coming back," she confirmed. "The lattice anchors. Personality matrix stabilizes around the new baseline. You would be." She searched for the word. "Fine. By their metrics. How long to stage 3, if the rate holds?" She looked at the screen again. 8 weeks. Jeth looked at his hands. They were perfectly steady. He noticed that, and hated it. The steadiness was part of it, he realized. Part of the stage 2 calm, the dissolving of edges that the lattice was already doing. He'd been calmer lately. He'd told himself it was maturity. Can it be removed? Not surgically. The lattice is interwoven with cortical tissue. Any physical intervention would be. She let the rest of it sit. "So I either accept it or you find another way." She met his eyes. "There's a resistance researcher at Outpost 9. She's been working on a counter-signal, frequency that degrades lattice coherence. But the process it's not clean. Shh. The lattice is tied into your nervous system. Degrading it from the inside would be, how long would it take off my life?" Chung looked at him steadily. "The estimate is 14 to 20 years. The room was very quiet. Not the torium quiet of treated minds going through appropriate motions, but the kind of quiet that lands when a real thing has been said out loud. 10 to 20 years. He was 26. He could math that easily enough. "And if I do nothing?" "You become fine," Chung said, and her voice was the flattest he'd ever heard it. And in the flatness was everything. He went back to his bunk. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling. 4 corners, he counted them carefully. 4, and thought about his father. Remembered what his father had been before the procedure. Big laugh, fast talker, hands always moving, the man who once stayed up all night in the kitchen, explaining to 8-year-old Jethro why black holes don't actually suck things in. They just curve space so gently toward themselves that falling is indistinguishable from flying. His father had made black holes sound like something you'd want to be near. After the procedure, his father was kind, patient, entirely pleasant. He listened to things and responded appropriately, and had, in 11 years, not once stayed up past 10 o'clock, because there was an idea he couldn't stop chasing. Jethro had been racing towards something his whole adult life without knowing what it was. Something that required speed. He thought maybe it was just himself. Just the particular bright-burning self he'd been born with. And the Vithara had decided that self was a symptom. He pulled out his dog tags and turned them over in his fingers. His name on one side, blood type on the other. He'd had them. Since basic, worn them so long they'd stopped feeling like objects and started feeling like part of the weight of being him. He thought about the researcher at Outpost 9. He thought about 14 years. He thought, what is 14 years compared to the rest of it? What does the math even mean when the alternative is that you never do the math again? Never argue about it at midnight. Never care. He sat up. He put his boots on. He hummed something, an old song his mother sang, off-key and slightly wrong, the kind of song you carry wrong on purpose so it stays yours. And he tied his boots and stood up and thought, all right. All right then. Outpost 9 was 3 hours by crawler across terrain that the Vethara had long since stopped bothering to monitor. Watch the cities. They watched the stations. Out here, in the broken geography between, things moved without observation, which was either the Resistance's greatest advantage or the Vethara's greatest trap, depending on the day. Dr. Yasena was 43, exhausted, brilliant in the specific ways of people who haven't had time to be impressed with themselves in years. She had a lab that was mostly spare parts and stubbornness. When Jethro explained his situation, she listened without interrupting. She had the manner of someone who had heard a great many things and learned to withhold her reactions until they were useful. And when he finished, she pulled up his lattice scan on her equipment and was quiet for a long time. The counter frequency is real, she said at last. I need you to understand what it is before you decide. It's not a weapon. It doesn't destroy the lattice. It destabilizes it, forces it to metabolize its own anchoring proteins to maintain coherence. The lattice survives. Eventually, it burns out. Process pulls resources from your neural tissue, and the damage is not repairable. How much is not repairable? She told him. The numbers were slightly worse than Chung's estimate. He looked at the ceiling of her lab. 6 tile panels, water-stained. 2 of them slightly wrong in a way he was already learning to distrust, and thought about his father's hands. How they used to move when his father talked. How they'd gone still. What's the success rate, he said. Of concept, 2 cases, both successful. 1 subject lost 16 years, 1 lost 19. Both kept themselves. Both kept themselves, she confirmed. Shh. He was quiet for a moment. Then, when I was a kid, I asked my dad how you know the difference between falling and flying when you're near a black hole. He said you don't, until you choose what to do about the falling. He paused. I think he was trying to tell me something. I think it was probably important. Senna looked at him. She didn't say anything. People in her line of work had learned not to fill silences like that. Do it, Jethro said. Process took 11 days. He'd expected pain. Pain was the expected thing, and he was prepared for it, had made his arrangements with it. Beforehand, the way you arrange things with a creditor you know is coming. What he hadn't expected was the way time behaved during those 11 days. The counter frequency interacted with the lattice in ways that bled into perception. He experienced hours as minutes, days as lifetimes. And in the spaces between, he fell through memories at random, could not always find the boundary between what was present and what was past. He experienced his 8th birthday, not remembered it, experienced it. The smell of his mother's kitchen and the weight of a book his father had given him about orbital mechanics. Still too complicated for him, and not caring, because his father had read the whole thing aloud, and that was the point. He experienced being 17, and finding out about the procedure for the first time, and the specific cold anger that had lodged in his chest and never entirely left. He experienced 100 small moments of being irreversibly, stubbornly, inconveniently himself, arguing in a mess hall, laughing too loud, staying up too late, caring about things that didn't matter, and mattering too much to the things that he cared about. He held on to those. He didn't know if he was choosing them or if they were choosing him. But he held on. The lattice fought back. Of course it did, it was designed to. On day 7, it pushed into his limbic system. And for 14 hours, Jethro felt a calm so profound. It was almost convincing, a soft settling, a loosening of every tension he'd been carrying. A world where the edges were smooth, and the math was easy, and everything was measured, and appropriate and fine. He lay in Sina's medical bay, and breathed and felt the fineness of it, and understood, in a way he hadn't before, why people accepted it, why it worked. It felt like relief. It felt like being healed. He thought about his father's hands going still. He gritted his teeth. He said out loud to no one, not yet. And the calm cracked just slightly, at the sound of his own voice, ragged and specific and his, and he held the crack open with everything he had. Day 11, the lattice failed, not explosively, not with drama, it simply stopped cohering. Sina watched the readings and said, "There," very quietly, and Jethro lay on the medical bay table and watched the ceiling tiles resolve into their correct positions and counted them. 6. All 6, all correct, all entirely exactly what they were supposed to be. His hands were shaking. He looked at them and was enormously glad for the shaking. He sat up. His head felt like it had been emptied and refilled with something heavier and cleaner than what had been there before. Sina handed him water without being asked, and he drank half of it, and then stopped because he was going to cry and he needed a moment with that. "You're cognitively intact," she said, reading her instruments. The lattice burned out cleanly. No residual coherent signatures. "You'll need monitoring for." "How long did I lose?" he said. She hesitated. She showed him the number. 17 years. He turned it over in his mind. The math was not kind. It was his math to do, and he did it with his own brain, in his own time, at his own pace, and that was the thing. That was the whole unglamorous, irreversible, entirely human thing. "Does it work on the treated cases?" he said. "Your counter frequency, on people who've already accepted." Sina was quiet for a moment. "Not in its current form. The anchored lattice is significantly more stable. I'd need," she paused, "I'd need someone to help me develop a stronger version. Someone who understood lattice behavior from the inside." Jethro thought about that. He thought about 1,200 humans at Station 12, going through their measured days. He thought about his father's hands. "You know," he said, "I'm probably going to be really annoying to work with. I argue a lot, I stay up too late. I think about 3 things at once, and I sometimes start sentences I don't know how to finish, and I make coffee wrong on purpose because the right way tastes terrible." Senna looked at him. The ghost of something moved across her expression. Not a smile exactly, but the precursor to one, the structural support. "I'm aware," she said. "I read your file." And she pushed a second chair toward him. The universal scientific gesture. "Sit down, we have work to do." He pulled it close to her workbench. His hands were still shaking slightly, which he was still glad for. Outside, through the outpost's single narrow window, the sky was doing what skies do. Enormous and various and blue in a way that had nothing to do with anyone's permission. And Jethro looked at it for a moment with the full brightness of his own attention. The bright, burning, ungovernable thing the Vithara had decided was a symptom. He turned back to the bench. He picked up a tool. He got to work. 11 months later, the counter frequency reached the accepted cases. The Vithara could not explain what happened next. Their models had not predicted it. Humanity, in their assessment, was too damaged, too fragmented, too inconsistent in its cognitive states to mount a coordinated response to anything. The sanatorium was supposed to have been the final treatment for that inconsistency. What the Vethara had not modeled was what happens when you give a species a good reason to be themselves. What happens when the thing you're trying to treat turns out to be the treatment? When the recklessness is not a pathology, but a methodology? When the loudness and the staying up too late and the arguing about things that don't matter are not symptoms of a sick species, but the operating system of a species that invented every useful thing it ever had by being too stubborn to accept the appropriate answer. First accepted case that came back looked at her own hands for a long time. Then she asked, "What did I miss?" The second asked, "What do we do now?" The third one laughed. It was a loud, undignified, inappropriately large laugh, and it echoed through the outpost corridors, and everyone who heard it felt something loosen in their chest, some held breath releasing. The Vethara received the reports with what their analysts described as perplexity. The humans were, by any measurement, less healthy now, more volatile, more inconsistent, burning faster, sleeping less, more prone to decisions that prioritized meaning over longevity. The humans were, by any measurement, themselves. One of the Vethara analysts submitted a note to the evaluation committee. The note said, "We may have misdiagnosed." The committee considered this for some time. By then, Jethro had already started on the third revision.